The Waddle family and their connection to life on the Tennessee Tombigbee Waterway began in the early 1800s, when it was just the Tombigbee River. Today we'll enjoy a little story of how it evolved and became such an important part of my family's day-to-day life and its future. You're looking at a map of the Tennessee Tombigbee Waterway. At the time that the Waddles came to this area, they settled just off of what is known as Mud Creek, located just north of John Rankin Lock and Dam. They made a life there for themselves and their children. And this is what we're going to discuss of how they did it. All of these dams were not always named according to this map. Where the James Whitten Lock and Dam was, it was originally called Bay Springs. From there, J.V. Montgomery was Lock E, John Rankin was Lock D, Fulton Lock and Dam was Lock C, and such until you got to Amory, which is the divide from the canal to the river. Who were the Waddles? As with each family, there are a lot of stories that could be shared, but for the most part, they were farmers. They were large families with multiple children and multiple grandchildren. They were hard workers. They worked from sun up to sundown, and they had great senses of humor. They could pull a joke faster than you could get out of the way. From the earliest times of the Waddle family settling in this area, Mud Creek was center of the family. After church on Sundays, they would meet the entire family to have picnics on the banks, then go swimming or fishing, even hunting. Just generally being a family and being together after church. The soil around the Tombigbee River as well as Mud Creek was rich in sediment. Food was easily grown, and meat and fish were predominant in the area. Textiles such as cotton was grown to form clothing, and the skins from the hunts were tanned and made into coats and other useful materials around the farms. The clay in the area was used for making household containers, such as plates, vessels for storing food or cooking. Many of the pots that were made were topped and stored by caves inside the edge of creeks that were where they would not be flooded, so that the food could be brought out throughout the winter when needed. Fruits, wild berries, and wild grapes were plentiful throughout the area. They were gathered mostly by the children, brought home for Mom to cook and preserve by either drying or canning in jellies and jams. These could be used throughout the winter when there was no vegetation growth to feed the family. Just south of Mud Creek, we have a family church with a family cemetery. Many of our ancestors are buried there. The church is Mount Vernon Baptist Church, and it's on John Rankin Highway. We gather there once a year in August for decoration and singing. Our families always put God first, stood with our country, sacrificed for our families. Nothing has changed through the generations. As we have spread out throughout this country, we've remained very close through social media, but more through family reunions. But remembering our family church once again, my grandfather told the preacher one day when he got on to him about not being in church every Sunday, Granddaddy said, "In my opinion, preacher, this nature is God's church, and you better be as close to him in a boat fishing on Sunday morning as you are in that church house." Brother O'Rear couldn't argue with that. It was during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency that this construction project began to have a heartbeat, However, it was not until Richard Nixon's presidency that it actually began to breathe. Through the presidencies after that, Jimmy Carter actually slashed the budget for the waterway. But it came back. While Congress did not want to fund the project, the public wanted it built. 6,500 constituents gathered in Columbus, Mississippi to proclaim to President Carter, "We want this waterway." It was at their demand that Congress reviewed funding it. While the main transportation for products being grown or produced in the mid-southern states was the Tennessee River, Washington took notice as to how long it was taking products to get to market in Mobile and New Orleans. They also noticed that at one point on the Tennessee River, at the point of Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee coming together, those boats were within 500 miles of the Gulf of Mexico. While the cut-through from the Tennessee River to the Tombigbee was being constructed, rural Mississippi and Alabama were subject to meeting people from all over the world who had come in with the Corps of Engineers to create this massive trench. In fact, it was nicknamed the American Panama Canal. In 1972, the waterway began construction. As the Corps began to unearth and move to allow for river traffic, we were able to see some of the artifacts our family left behind on Mud Creek and the banks of the Tenn-Tom Waterway in the rural area, where 8 households of my family were directly displaced but financially compensated by the government for their move. During the construction of the Tenn-Tom Waterway, we would go and see the progress of the construction and walk the land where our family once lived. We began to find artifacts left behind by our ancestors, as well as a petrified tree. Most of the artifacts and all of the tree that we were able to excavate are now on display at the Orrin Dunn City Museum in Tupelo, Mississippi. The Tenn-Tom Waterway spans 234 miles in length, 10 lakes, 10 locks, and dams. From the south, it begins at Demopolis, Alabama, and runs north to Amory, Mississippi. That is the river section. From there north is the canal section, running to the Jamie L. Whitten Lock and Dam near Dennis, Mississippi. 46 miles in length, it has a total of 5 locks and dams. You're looking at a map of the divided section. This is at the entrance of the Tennessee River into the Tenn-Tom Waterway. It runs from Pickwick Dam down to Jamie Whitten Lock and Dam near Dennis, Mississippi. In this area, there was a lot of demolition that had to be done and a lot of rock broken through to create this. The divide section begins at Jamie L. Whitten Lock and Dam and runs 39 miles to Yellow Creek on Pickwick Lake near the Tennessee border. In this area, you will find a lot of industry, more so than any other section of the waterway. It was the hardest and longest to complete and populates the workforce throughout the area. The Tenn-Tom Waterway has 3 federally authorized purposes: navigation, wildlife migration, and recreation. While these purposes do not justify a $2 billion mandate by Congress, 2 congressmen were key in having the funding passed: Senator John Stennis and Congressman Jamie Whitten, both of Mississippi. President Jimmy Carter put the Tenn-Tom project on his targeted hit list to be deauthorized at one point. However, Congress, despite the weaknesses and non-existence of economic justification, pushed it forward, focusing on the environmental impact and cutting off some 800 miles from the Tennessee River to the Gulf of Mexico, and lowering costs for transportation in the process. While the Tenn-Tom Waterway is a wildlife migration habitat, It features some 70,000 acres of land and another 100,000 acres of areas where wildlife can thrive naturally. It is a hunter's paradise. However, being owned by the Corps of Engineers, you must have permits to hunt there. To give you a synopsis of the wildlife in this area, there's mallard ducks. There's wildlife as far as fish, which are bass, catfish, brim, crappie. And then you always have the white-tailed deer, rabbit, squirrel, and yes, those little creatures we call snakes, they're in there too. It all makes the world go round. In 1985, when the Tennessee Tombigbee Waterway opened, there was more recreational boating use than there was commercial shipping. Today, there are more outdoor recreational opportunities for some 3 million people each year. From wildlife habitats to picnicking, fishing and camping, and other water activities are abundant. So what is it like today? Since the waterway came through, the local college has doubled in size. All the schools have improved. They have new facilities. They have computers. And then they have cell phones. All these things, the outside world of this rural area had many years before they knew about them. I have watched as my parents learned how to use a computer, saw a cell phone for the first time, learned to operate it, got satellite television, and even got city water. It was amazing to them. Many had never had that in their life, or even knew what some of it was. Troy University did an impact study of the waterway on the area of construction as of 2009. A direct and indirect impact economically was $43 billion with 29,000 jobs directly linked to the waterway. This has revitalized an area that had almost been forgotten. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. Okay, we've looked at yesterday and how far we've come to today. So what do we see for tomorrow? More growth, more river traffic, opportunity, and dreams to be fulfilled. This area, 3 generations back, could not have imagined this river now. I often wonder what my grandfather or my great-grandfather might have thought of this great river. Man-made though it was still where they grew up and where they fished and hunted. They can't be forgotten. If we don't know where we came from, how do we know where we're going? It is only by God's grace that any and all of us live today. May we always remember our ancestors whom God gave this land and the lives that they had, so that we may prosper in the days to come and pass on where we've been. We are all teachers. No matter how knowledgeable we are, no matter how wealthy we are, no matter how poor we are. We're all God's creatures. And if we do not learn from our past, we're doomed to repeat it in the future. So let us keep in mind as we go forward to pass on the knowledge that we have gained.